The Georgia Secretary of State's office on Wednesday confirmed that it had received a letter from the United States Department of Justice that NBC News reports was sent to election officials in all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, warning of the potential for criminal penalties if election officials violate federal laws that ban non-citizen voting. Jessica Huseman is the editorial director of the nonprofit election-focused news outlet VoteBeat. Jessica joins us now. Jessica, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with this. Give us the context in which this letter was sent, and if you can, how it was received by these election officials here in Georgia and all across the country.
Yeah, of course. This comes at a time when the Trump administration is very much trying to assert its authority in elections in a lot of different spaces. Just a couple of days ago, for example, they fired all 3 remaining commissioners at the Election Assistance Commission. So election officials across the country are on edge a little bit. And then this letter arrives saying that, if you knowingly leave non-citizens on the rolls, we will consider criminal prosecutions. And it was received in an interesting way. It was sent out by email. It appears mostly to the general email inboxes that you find on a website that you might interact with as a voter, like info@secretaryofstate.gov. That is how Georgia received its letter. So some of these states had to go hunting for it and did not realize that they had received it for several hours.
Let me read you the response we got from the Georgia Secretary of State's office. And then I want to get your thoughts on how some of these other states have received and responded as well. But this is what a spokesman for the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, said, quote, Secretary Raffensperger has led the nation in keeping American elections for American citizens only. He conducted the first statewide citizenship audit of Georgia's voter rolls, secured key improvements to the federal SAVE database, and has called on Congress to enshrine citizen-only voting in the Constitution. Under his leadership, Georgia has set the standard for election integrity by ensuring only American citizens decide our elections and continuing to fight to prevent non-citizen voting. So that was from Robert Sinners, the spokesman for Brad Raffensperger's office. Have other states responded in a similar fashion?
They absolutely have. Yeah. I think that this is such an interesting thing to send a letter about, because at the same time that election officials are kind of on heightened alert for federal intervention, this is what the content of the letter concerned. And from the state perspective, non-citizen voting isn't a problem. And so it's kind of hard to be worried about the possibility of criminal convictions for something that doesn't happen, and certainly not knowingly. And so I think the response that we get from Georgia, which is, hey, we've checked this, that we've checked this and we didn't find anything and we're going to continue following the law as we understand it. That is basically the response that we're getting from everywhere from Colorado to New Hampshire.
Is it common for the Department of Justice to send a letter like this out to state election officials?
No, not at all. I think that, this is a really interesting way of reminding people what the obvious letter of the law is. I don't think that any of the laws that were detailed in this letter are news to election officials. And it's very much felt as a pressure campaign. I think there's one tone you take if you're just sending a little update on best practices, and there's one tone you take if it's something different. And this is something different. And so I think it's a strange letter. I don't know that anything really meaningful will come of it. It has asked states to respond and explain how they intend to keep non-citizens off the rolls by a certain amount of time. That deadline is approaching. I think it was 5 business days. And that's information, by the way, that states have given the DOJ before. The DOJ has asked for this information in lawsuits and other letters and other threats. Almost every state in the country has provided detailed accounts of this already to the DOJ. And so Wisconsin, for example, has already responded, and the content of their response is basically see previous responses.
So obviously this all happens not inside of a vacuum. We've got elections happening all the time. We've got a special election coming up in just a few weeks here at the end of the month in the 13th Congressional District here in Georgia for the remainder of late Representative David Scott's term. And of course, we've got the midterms coming up in just a couple months here. How will this letter impact the way that election officials go about their jobs as we head into the midterms?
I really don't think that it will. I think as election officials have said to you and to me, I don't think that they're worried about this as a possibility. I think that this builds on a larger campaign. I think this in isolation doesn't have much of an impact. States don't need to take any additional steps to enforce this because they are already following the law as it is written. And though that is what they've said in their statements, I think this does add to the overall feeling that they are being watched very closely. But I think in practice, the election administrators across the country are watching the Trump administration and its success rate in fighting these battles, and it's not good for the Trump administration. For example, there have been 11 lawsuits over whether or not to turn over the state's full voter rolls. Trump has lost all 11 of those lawsuits. And so I think increasingly election administrators are realizing that the threats the Trump administration makes don't have a lot of teeth.
So we're a little short on time here. I want to ask you this last question before we let you go. I asked you a moment ago how this letter, in your view, will impact the way election officials carry out their duties over the next few months. I want to ask you that same question, but from the other side of the equation there. This letter comes. What comes next from federal officials and from the Department of Justice in the months leading up to the midterm election? Does this letter tell us anything about what may be to come from federal officials?
I think it definitely reinforces the fact that this is the focal point for the Trump administration when it comes to election integrity. They are very, very focused on non-citizen voting. And I think we should continue to expect things to come of that. I think that we should expect them to accuse people of being non-citizens. Think we should expect them to continue to search the voter rolls for non-citizens. These are checks that often come up with a lot of false positives and that states have already completed. But I think we should expect more of the same thing. Absolutely.
Right now, the World Cup is doubling as a global test lab for the future of sports. AI referee cameras and players are tracking and producing a flood of new data. And Kennesaw State is studying what actually helps players and fans. All 48 World Cup teams have FIFA's Football AI Pro for pre and post match analysis. 16 cameras track the ball and players 50 times a second, powering offside calls and 3D replays, and more than 1,200 players were 3D scanned to create digital avatars for more accurate review and realistic replays. Here now to talk more about this research is Chad Gabert from KSU's Department of Exercise Science and Sports Management. Chad, when you watch this World Cup as a researcher, what are you seeing that the average fan may never notice?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an innovation lab. They are doing all kinds of things. One of the things that I notice is how much they're integrating technology from the time you show up to the stadium until the time that you leave the stadium, but also your viewing experience at home. So they're really pushing technology and making those technologies the one of the showcases of what's going on here.
And so tell us, what's the difference between having more data and having better information?
Yeah, we have more data than ever before in sports. They are getting thousands of data points on every play. And so we have more data than ever before. And so that's where it comes down to the expertise of parsing that data out. What's valuable, what's not valuable. And I think that FIFA does a good job of that because they practice these technologies. They don't just unveil them at the World Cup. They practice them at the Intercontinental Cup and other things like that. So sometimes we see these things and are like, oh, they just pulled this out of nowhere. But they've been working with these things, they've been prototyping, they've been working on those things. So they're finding the data that matters.
All right, so break it down for me in simple terms. How does a camera turn a player's movement into information that a coach can actually use?
Yeah, so they do a lot of things from volumetric capture like Lenovo does, where they literally scan every player and they track the movement of the player so they can track them down to millimeters. And then coaches can use it in practice and in games. They have player tracking technology that allows you to understand how much work a player's done, how much ground they've covered, where they are, whether they were in the right position or not. Because sometimes as a coach, you see things and you don't actually see the full picture. And now you get the full picture because data shows you where a player's been, if they were in position, how hard they're working, and things like that through tracking technology.
And so share with us how you and your students are using this World Cup as a real world classroom.
Yeah, so it's been great. I had classes in the spring and here in the summer that we talk about these kind of things, from building out our own augmented reality technology to building out our own statistics. And a lot of students build their own statistics to track what's going on in the World Cup and what's going on with individual players. So they've been able to like really have, sometimes it's theoretical, but now they've been able to see like practical things actually happening on the pitch that they can see and they can measure themselves. And so that's been really helpful.
You know, for a lot of people, they think the technology is just moving a little bit too fast and they can't seem to keep up. Just leave it alone. But in your opinion, is technology making the beautiful game better or simply just making it different?
That's a great question, because I just saw an article that came back and said how technology is ruining the World Cup. And so I love technology. I research technology, but you don't just do technology for technology's sake. There has to be a purpose. It has to have a plan, and there has to be a reason for the technology. And I think one of the things that we could all do better, especially around sport technology, is explain what's happening, not just implement the technology and say, everybody catch up. Implement the technology and say, this is what it's for, this is the purpose. Because we've seen people embrace technology as long as they understand how it's being used, how it's being measured, how it's being implemented, and how it works. But if we just randomly throw it out there like some magical thing and expect people to understand, I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes from.
So 4 years from now, tell us which World Cup technology could feel completely routine.
I think so. And we've seen those things around sport. I think baseball actually did a really good job with the automated balls and strikes, and it's been really well accepted and things like that. Football had the first down line that measures the first down virtually. So I think once people understand what's going on and we see it, I think these things will become commonplace.
Businesses across Metro Atlanta are learning that the World Cup, well, comes with some rules, from these covered logos at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, now temporarily nicknamed Atlanta Stadium, to what your favorite bar can and can't put on a chalkboard sign. Here to break down FIFA's trademark playbook, Dr. Heather Morgan, Clinical Assistant Professor of Marketing and Professional Sales at Kennesaw State University. Good morning. Great having you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
That's quite the title, by the way. Did I get it right?
You did.
Okay,
Thank you.
nice.
Yes, it's pretty long.
Yeah. Well, important what you're studying here. It's fascinating when you think about the FIFA trademarks and how I guess they just like having control over things, right?
Yes, they really do. They have exclusive partnerships, so they want to make sure that their sponsors are really getting what they pay for. So
Because they're paying top dollar.
they are paying top dollar, yes. So they want to protect that with everything they can.
Okay, so let's take Atlanta Stadium, for example.
Yes.
We just showed it.
Yes.
Typically, we call it Mercedes-Benz Stadium because, I mean, who knows what Mercedes-Benz paid for that. Yet FIFA made them remove that branding. Why?
Well, because Mercedes-Benz is not an official sponsor. So again, back to protecting those official sponsorships. Since those brands are paying so much money, they want to make sure that no one gets any kind of incidental exposure, if you will.
And
So-
that's true for stadiums all across the U.S., Mexico,
Correct,
Canada.
yes.
Okay.
I mean, there was something really interesting that happened in California with Levi's Stadium. As
Tell me
we
about
saw.
that.
So just like Mercedes-Benz Stadium, FIFA made Levi's cover all of their logos as well because they're not an official sponsor. So when they did that, they put the draping over the logos, but what we realized is it's not really about the logo, right? Because people already knew what that logo looked like. So the fact that it got covered up, it actually got more people talking about it. So that's something called the Streisand effect. And it means that, when you're covering something up, you actually get more people talking about it and get more exposure. So Levi's was able to lean into that. It was pretty cool.
Levi's is just sitting back saying,
Yeah.
all right, we'll take this. No such thing as bad publicity, right?
Right. And they really became part of the conversation and changed all their socials to show that blacked out logo. So it's pretty
Interesting.
cool.
Yeah. All right. So they're leaning into it and embracing it. What about, let's say I'm a restaurant in Atlanta and I want to lean into the World Cup. Can I put up a sign outside my restaurant that says World Cup specials or official watch party location?
No, you cannot. So you have to be very careful about how you're doing that. You can host a watch party, but you have to be careful not to use the World Cup terminology or any of the logos. But still, it's all about leaning into the experience and just remembering that visibility gets you attention, but it's really participation that matters because that's what builds loyalty. So you don't necessarily have to have your logo everywhere. You can still participate and get that consumer emotion and build loyalty that way.
So how can you participate legally speaking?
So, well, I don't have all the legal ins and outs because I'm not a legal professor, but you have to be very careful to make sure that you're following the World Cup branding trademark rules. So I would refrain from calling it the World Cup. Maybe you could say that you're having a watch party for the big event or
Yes.
something like that.
It's kind of like similar to the Super Bowl, right? The big game specials and whatnot.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a name for this, right? Ambush marketing?
Ambush marketing.
Tell me about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so it's really just trying to ride on the coattails and take advantage of the opportunity without necessarily using the official sponsorship terminology. And, you know,
Okay.
you don't want to break any laws, so.
Does FIFA actually enforce these rules during
Yes.
the tournament?
Yes, they do. They do because they rely heavily on those sponsorships that they're selling. So they want to make sure that their sponsors get what they pay for.
What are some of their big sponsors? Do you know? I'm trying to think off the top of my
Adidas
head.
is
Okay.
is a top sponsor for them. Powerade, they're sponsoring the hydration breaks. But again, it's not so much about having your name out there. It's about what you're doing with that visibility. So participation is what's going to build loyalty, not just having your logo out there. Consumers want to feel like it's part of the experience and not something that's just being forced on them.
Mm-hmm.
So brands have to be very careful to not just be intrusive, right? They want to be part of the conversation, but you have to be careful as to how you do that.
As somebody who studies marketing for a living, what have you found most interesting about the World Cup being in your backyard?
Well, I think just the extra excitement that it brings to Atlanta. We already know what a great city it is, but certainly the extra excitement that's here. I think some of the viral moments have been really interesting, like, for instance, what's happened with Hidden Valley Ranch. For example, in Europe, ranch is not as big as we are on ranch here, so people have really taken to ranch, and that whole product category is really having a moment.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
And who would have thought? I mean, you think
Who would
Hidden
have thought?
Valley
I mean,
drew that
I'm a
up?
huge fan, but I don't know.
Same. We do love a good
Yes.
condiment. Waffle House
Yes,
getting a lot of attention
Waffle House
lately.
getting a lot of attention as well. I mean,
Interesting.
deservedly so, right?
Well, of course, we do love our
Yes,
Wahoo here
we
in
do.
A. Anything else I'm missing that you want to mention today?
I think, this is just an incredible opportunity for our city. We know, because we live here, we know what an exciting place it is, but certainly the extra press that's come along with Atlanta, it's about leaving that impression with viewers so that they want to come to Atlanta if they maybe couldn't make it here for the match, or even if they did, so that they want to come back.
Yeah, so if you're at the Convention Visitors Bureau in Atlanta, what are you thinking right now from a marketing perspective?
Wow, I'm just thinking what a great time it is to show off all the great things that we have in our city. So we have great food, culture, history, entertainment,
Yeah.
sports. I mean, everyone else is just seeing what we already know.
Professor Jerry Mangine with Kennesaw State University, and you're an expert in this. I'm going to read your full title because it's worth pointing it out. Professor of Exercise Science and Director of the Center for Research on Human Sport Performance and Well-Being. Jerry, thanks for being with us. This is right in your wheelhouse, talking about World Cup.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's elite sports, and that's what I do on research, is try to figure out what makes that happen.
How much of it, as you research this, is it in the head versus in the body that makes up an elite athlete?
It's a combination of both, but once you get to that level, they're all great athletes, so it is a lot of the mental game.
Is there a way, and I guess let's just start here, how much has our understanding of what makes an elite athlete evolved in the last decade or two?
Last decade is fast forwarded a lot. With the internet and sharing information, research, that sped things up. But it is a very young field where it kind of kicked off 80s and 90s, and it's since the 2000s we've really started to understand things.
I'm watching a documentary right now on the early days of the Premier League, the top flight league for soccer in England, for those who don't watch. And it started off in the early 90s. And even just looking at the preparation, the recovery techniques in play, or maybe not in play at the time compared to where they are now in 2026, the amount of science, I mean, real true science being done in the training facilities and the locker rooms sure seems to have come a long way in those 30 years.
It has. And the thing is, the science is always behind what the coaches are doing. The coaches think of new techniques, they try them out. Some things work with some athletes, not others. And the job of the exercise scientist is to support that, find evidence to support that. And so that's kind of how we've come along, trying to dispel the myths of what might work for recovery, what is the key, the formula to make an elite athlete. All those things, we've been coming along big time.
What do you think is maybe the most widely held misconception when you look at the state of sports dialogue from a kind of unique vantage point of somebody who does academic research on a field that I think you'd agree with me is awash in hot takes that are typically not grounded in a lot of academic rigor?
I think the biggest misconception is that we're not just looking at the best athletes out there. There's very few times is it that the fastest person is the best player. I mean, maybe in track and field, but yeah, it's not just these individual skills. It's a combination of skills. It's a combination of opportunity. And like I said before, there is a mental aspect of having that ability to assess what's happening in the game, make a decision faster than your opponent, giving you that edge because you're going against someone who's equally talented. So thinking of the solution first, that's what's going to separate the best from almost the best.
Something you hear a lot about from commentary crews and candidly, in my much less vaunted career as an athlete, I certainly never got close to even dreaming of looking at a World Cup field that I wasn't a spectator on. But, whether you play JV sports in high school or you go all the way, you hear about momentum in a game, in a race, in any kind of athletic competition. Is that legit, or is it a little overhyped?
I mean, that's a little bit beyond the things that I look at, but confidence is a big issue. So momentum, success, that breeds more success. You build a culture. You hear coaches talking about that all the time. So having the culture, having the success, but also knowing how to deal with adversity.
Not letting it spiral?
Not letting it spiral. And, you look at these players out there, I'm willing to bet that all of them at some point weren't the best players on their team, that they had to struggle. And that's what, builds their great character and their ability to deal with adversity is having that struggle. They've been the best players on their team and they've been maybe not the best or even the worst. Who knows? I mean, I guess every player is different, but going back and forth, that's what breeds the best athlete, not just always crushing it.
Have there been any moments of this World Cup, specific moments that have really stood out to you?
When USA lost.
Yeah, boy, this podcast, this interview is about to take a turn because I'm still grieving a little bit from that one.
Well, you're always hoping, right?
They give you, we're really going to take a turn here if I'm not careful because I could do half an hour just on this.
Yeah.
They give you just enough to dare to dream.
Yeah.
And then, they dash the hope. But we still love you guys. 4 more years. We got the women next year, so we got that.
I think it's not anything unexpected because you expect the unexpected when you're dealing with this type of level of competition. In football they say any given Sunday,
Sure.
any day the best in the world can lose, and just expect to enjoy the game. That's really what you can do.
Are there off the field, off the track, off the course tendencies that the truly great athletes exhibit?
I think there's a very fine line between what we would call doing way too much versus what the best in the world have to do. And they have to balance that. So it's about recovery. It's about their regimen. It's about thinking about all the little things that we would probably never even dream to be concerned with. Their meals, when they go to bed, when they wake up, that pre-bed ritual that gets them to sleep. Whereas you or I, if we're about to play to go to the World Cup, maybe we'd be pretty nervous about that.
I would say so.
Yeah, and not be able to sleep that night. But they have a regimen that they get through and allows them to get the recovery they need. Without that recovery, I mean, this is weeks-long tournament. There's going to be aches and pains and injuries, and they do every little thing that they can to make themselves ready.
You remind me of some famous basketball players. You think of Michael Jordan. You think of Kobe Bryant. These guys who were famous for their off-the-court work ethic, even when compared to other elite NBA guys. Is it sometimes a challenge to coach athletes like that, as great as they are, as talented as they are? Is it sometimes, from your perspective, tough to get people who are already so successful to keep fine-tuning the habits that they could rightly say, hey, I know what I'm doing. I've gotten all this way doing things how I do them.
So my background is strength and conditioning. So from a strength and conditioning aspect, yes, that's very hard, especially with elite athletes. Having worked in professional baseball and individually with a number of athletes, well, the individual ones, they're coming to you for your expertise. But when you're with a team, you deal with those athletes that want to put their hand up and say, hey, I've got it. And in that case, you make yourself available to them and answer their questions and help them when you can. But the other ones, you'd be surprised. There's still a lot of things that you can do because even the best in the world can improve.
How much does trust play a role in all of this? A relationship between coach and player, between player and player, between staff and team?
If you don't have trust, you don't have a job. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, you're a team. You call it a team for a reason, and you're going into this competition, and if you're not working together in the game, before the game, after the game, you're not going to be very successful unless you're just really good, and even then, you're probably not going to make it to the tippy top.
We're a little short on time here. I don't want to forget some other folks who often do get overlooked.
Yeah.
Unless, unfortunately, things go a little sideways. I empathize with them. I was a goalie in high school, and not a lot of people are talking about you unless something goes a little sideways. Mm-hmm. But the referees have it even worse. They're out a little bit on an island, but they're athletes too. They've got to be able to run with the play, and they've got to be able to make really fast decisions as well.
Yeah.
And you hope, in front of billions of people, they're getting it right.
Yes.
What's going through their mind? What separates the great referees from everybody else?
Yeah, so we have a faculty member at Kennesaw that is working his way up in the professional ranks, and through him we did
As a referee?
As a referee, yeah. And through him, we did a study on those sideline referees. And doing that study, it really opened my eyes. So the sideline referees, they're running up and down the field with, staying with the gameplay, and they have to hold their hand at their side with holding that flag. That is a biomechanically inefficient way to run, and yet they have to keep up with some of the fastest people in the world and still be able to see everything. I would have to say that they're on par with those athletes in terms of that ability. It's amazing what they're able to do and still get it right from most of the time.
Pretty soon we're going to be back to school. Parents checking off school supplies and new clothes right now. But what about a comprehensive eye exam? Our next guest says you should absolutely consider including that on your back to school checklist. Joining us now is Dr. Amanda Nancy, a sports medicine optometrist. Doc, it's great having you on the show. Good morning.
Great to be here. Thanks, Dan.
So who should be considering an eye exam this summer and why?
Everyone should be getting a comprehensive eye exam this summer. I'll tell you that parents are so busy, so it's really easy to forget things that we don't actually have on our must-to-do list. But 9 out of 10 parents in a recent study said they understand that vision is important for academics, but we still have a large percentage of kids that haven't had those eye exams. And I'll tell you that these are arguably one of my athletes' most important pieces of equipment, and definitely important for your kiddo to perform the way you want them to in school.
So if parents know the importance, and by the way, as a father of two, I am not judging because we get busy, we put things on the back burner, we forget about them. But what do you think the hang up is? Why are we not getting these comprehensive eye exams for our kids? Is it cost?
I don't know if it's cost. I think it's that we just assume that our kids would tell us if something's wrong, but we've definitely learned that that's not always the case. And sometimes the signs of needing an eye exam are easy to see, like squinting or holding things close, but sometimes they're very subtle, and it might even be changes in their performance, either in their sports or they're not at the level that we need them to be with reading if they're in elementary school. So it's really important to just get that overall check to make sure that they are as good as we think they are.
Who should the first call be to? How do parents start to put this on the schedule with the remaining month or so we have before school starts?
I would call their local eye doctor. There's actually a really good resource, myalcon.com/back to school. It has information about contact lenses and things like that that might be good options for kids, but also you can find an eye care provider near you, but that's what you want. You want a comprehensive eye exam. So call up your local friendly optometrist and they will be happy to get your kiddo in and advocate for things that you think are important. If they do potentially actually want to wear contact lenses. It's something that a lot of eye doctors may not bring up as an option for your child, especially if it's their first time in glasses. But as a daughter or as a parent of a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old that both play sports, contact lenses are really important for not only performance, but also building confidence if they're not comfortable in glasses.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up the contacts versus glasses debate. It's going to be different for every family, I imagine. What about schools? Do they still do vision screenings? I mean, are those as effective as what you can get done at the eye doctor?
They do them, and we are grateful for them because they do catch some big things that are going wrong with vision, and those kids end up in our offices. But they just shouldn't be relied on as the only source of whether or not their vision is where we need it to be, because there are things that could be missed. Just because they can read a chart on the wall doesn't mean that they weren't working significantly harder than they should be to see it. And that's going to be something that your eye doctor can tell, as well as if their eyes are healthy. That's very important.
You know, we are raising a generation on screens between the computer, the iPads, the cell phones. What does that mean for vision long term? Do we know?
You know, it's funny because parents used to look at me and say, they shouldn't be on the screens, right? But we have to be. It's just a matter of doing it the best way possible. Making sure that if you do have a visual correction, you're comfortable all day, you have contacts that stay hydrated and don't dry out, that you have the proper distance from what you're using. This is actually a good rule of thumb. It's an elbow. This is how far away you should have whatever it is that you're looking at, whether it be a tablet or a phone. They shouldn't be here. And moderation should be used if possible, but sometimes you can't avoid it.
How concerned should people be when we talk about the confirmation of a West Nile case?
So that's a great question. You know, one of the things we want to be aware of is we don't want to be fear mongering, right? It's not something that people need to rush out and do anything crazy about, but it is important to understand when it comes to mosquitoes, they can vector a variety of diseases, and West Nile is certainly one that can impact humans. And so it's a good reminder the importance that mosquito control efforts and surveillance do to really help make sure that the public is safe from these pests. And so lots of different things that individuals can do to help manage mosquitoes and trying to keep themselves and their loved ones safe.
As an entomologist, what kind of trends do you see when there's one confirmation? Is that usually an indication of more cases to follow? Might this just be the beginning of what we need to keep an eye on closely?
Yeah, it's another great question. Some of the initial reports that have come out talk about this being pretty early in the season for this to show up. And when we see things like West Nile that are reservoired in other animals like birds, the indication is that it's here, it's in some of these reservoirs, and now is the time to be vigilant and make sure that we're trying to keep these populations of mosquitoes under control and keeping ourselves individually protected as best we can when we're dealing with mosquitoes, so that we don't have to deal with some of the larger implications of some of these vector-borne diseases.
You know, we're in a pattern here of pop-up showers, throughout the day. Can you talk us through why these rainy times or rainy patterns have an impact on the number of mosquitoes you might see?
Yeah, that's a really great question. When it comes to mosquitoes, mosquitoes, while we see the adults flying around, the young are totally aquatic. So mosquitoes need standing water to be able to, lay their eggs and their eggs to hatch out. And those eggs and larvae and pupa will all live their lives up until the adult stage in water. And so when we get these really heavy, intense storms like we've been having lately, we get pockets of puddles or things that get filled with water that maybe hadn't been so much of a concern earlier in the year when it was much drier. But children's toys or landscaping features that are able to hold this standing water now become a really big threat as a mosquito breeding ground. And so opportunities to evaluate that or survey your property are super important to be able to eliminate that water and thus eliminate breeding sites for mosquitoes. And so it's a great way to kind of get ahead of some of the challenges with mosquito populations and the growth that can happen with those.
So everybody kind of check their property. Maybe it's an apartment building or your home, and those are the things that you need to keep an eye on. So in terms of prevention, does that tie into them? What can people do in terms of prevention to make sure that they can limit their risk of West Nile or just the inconvenience of just getting kind of eaten alive, as people like to say, in terms of mosquito bites?
Yeah, so there's lots of different things, right? Source reduction of water is one of the biggest. There are various very specific products that are designed to be in water that are only toxic to mosquitoes. That some are available to the general public, others are more professional use. But having a professional come out and assess your home or property for some of these areas and provide targeted treatments for both what we call the larva or larviciding and potential adulticide treatments, where you might imagine that as a backpack mist blower or something like that to put out products to try and kill these adult mosquitoes. So those all help to reduce the number of mosquitoes in general. And then as an individual, CDC and a lot of other great state resources have a lot of guidance on, making sure nobody likes to do it, but in the summer and hot months, wearing long sleeve shirts, long pants to protect your skin, and wearing EPA registered insect repellents. There's lots of really great data on those, working really, really well to keep mosquitoes away from us. And especially if you've got, young children or babies, things like that, using even mosquito netting to just physically stop them from being able to get to a baby in a stroller or something like that is a really great way, again, to help just stop the mosquito from getting there in the first place. So a multi-tiered approach, right? Reduce the population, reduce appearance of mosquitoes on your property, and then trying to keep them away from us as individuals is really the way to kind of think about it.
That's such a great tip about the mosquito netting on the little ones, because I know a lot of people concerned about chemicals with a little baby or a really young one.
Yeah.
So I love that's terrific advice. Before we let you go, the focus, of course, being West Nile, because we have that confirmation in Atlanta right now. But are there any other illnesses that people should be aware of when it comes to a connection with mosquitoes?
Yeah, I think we've had several in the last couple of years. We had some of the first cases of endemic malaria in the U.S. The last few years. And so, again, mosquitoes are a very competent vector for a variety of encephalitises, things like malaria, dog heartworm. And so all of these things play into, public health focus, keeping ourselves and our pets and our loved ones safe. And so it's just so important to understand that there's such a variety of diseases that they can transmit, focusing on, those core principles of reducing the ability for the mosquitoes to breed in the first place, and then stopping them from letting them bite us is really what we want to focus on, because there's no real way to know, aside from, like the great surveillance that we've seen showing this West Nile virus, that we don't know what each individual mosquito's got. And so the best case is prevention. How can we just stop it from happening in the first place, keeping ourselves safe? And that's really what we want to focus on.
We want to bring in Dr. Raha Suremi with Equatex, who you developed this system to turn pecan shells into leathers and fabrics that we can actually use for materials. So exciting. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to learn more about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so this was something that was spun out of research at the University of Georgia. Now Equatex and all of the research that you are doing has come into producing this material. Tell me a little bit about just kind of where the idea came from.
Yes, I have seen so many farmers, shellers, and processors treating agricultural byproducts as waste, and that's why and also I have a background in material science. I have a PhD in material science. That's why I focus my research on valorization of agricultural byproducts instead of discarding them, burning them, or using them for low value applications. So we turn them into advanced materials, into ingredients, formulations, and coatings for manufacturers and converters. Instead of using petroleum-based chemicals, they can use our inputs to make leather, leather, fibers, textiles,
Wow.
composites, and other materials for industrial application.
Now, I know that this is probably a loaded question, but how does that work? How do you go from pecan shell to, and I know you have a sample. Is this a leather sample?
Yes, so this is made of peanut shell,
Oh, peanuts.
Georgia's peanut, and this is made of Georgia's pecan.
Can I try? Can I?
Yeah,
oh, wow, look
sure.
at this. Oh, wow. And this is like a leather.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a leather alternative or synthetic leather.
A leather alternative, so you don't have
Yeah.
to kill a cow. You
Yeah.
use the shells of
Yeah,
pecans
that's
or
correct.
peanuts. So how do you get from a peanut shell to, I mean, this is really nice quality too. This is great.
Thank you. So agricultural byproducts, they usually have useful natural polymers. So what we do is we separate them and upgrade them into materials that we can use for making leather, fibers, other advanced materials, composites, and there are so many applications for them, for furnishing, interiors, non-woven, even we can use fibers made of pecan and peanuts. We call them nut fiber or nut leather, so they can use that to make masks, gowns for medical applications too. Basically, we give agricultural waste another life, and another advantage of our product is at the end of life cycle, we can recycle them because it's gonna naturally biodegrade. Eventually, it's not gonna stay on Earth forever. So basically, it's a closed loop system, and we give them another life. So
And also like an alternative to the plastics leathers that
Exactly.
just go into the ground and then just, they don't,
Yes.
I mean, it takes a very, very long time for those to
Yes.
break down.
So material industry, they face rising costs, supply chain disruptions, and new regulations every day. And fashion industry also, they have several problems with microplastic, with synthetic fibers, waste, and so we can solve all of them and also give value and life to agricultural waste, basically solving farmers and shellers problem too, because right now they either discard them, burn them, or use them for low value applications.
Now, does it cost a lot to do that process?
It does not cost a lot because the majority of the stuff that we use are waste, and we also use like minimal chemistry, safer chemistry, and we are not using any kind of expensive enzymatic treatment or microbial fermentation or anything like that. That's why we can keep the costs low and compete with traditional materials.
And we know that Georgia has such a big agriculture industry. I mean, I believe it is our #1 industry in the state. How does that impact your business and just the potential for creating more of these?
Yes, so Georgia is one of the top producers of, for example, pecans and peanuts. So we can turn that waste into materials for U.S. manufacturers. It's gonna be good for agriculture, for farmers and shellers, as well as for U.S. manufacturing, because they don't need to rely only on petroleum-based chemicals. So there are so many problems with that. Petroleum or oil changes, price changes all the time. And this way, the feedstock is available here in the U.S., made out of agricultural waste here in the U.S.
And I know that you said that there's a goal, right, to have more of these materials in the manufacturers, in the vendors. What does that look like, that communication, getting them from using whatever they already use, convincing them, hey, this is better for you, let's use this instead of what you're using? And when could we see, kind of widespread use of it, when I could just go in the store and purchase something that's made of pecan?
Sure. Yeah, so to answer your second question, we are still not on store shelves yet, but recently we have received a grant, our phase 2 EPA SBIR grant, and we are moving from bench scale to pilot scale and larger scale manufacturing. So we are moving toward that direction. So pretty soon you can buy nut leather or nut fiber bag, jackets, or another piece of clothing. But to answer your first questions, there are so many markets that we can enter into, and also there are so many applications such as fashion, textiles, medical, packaging, specifically for food. They are looking for safer, materials, safer chemistry, and there is a huge market for materials like us. Right now, we have seen difficulty for many manufacturers to get their feedstock because of the problem with petroleum, feedstock and materials. That's why we see an opportunity to turn agricultural waste here in the U.S. to feedstock and raw materials for manufacturers. So
Yeah.
there is a huge market for materials like us.
I love that. I love that. What is still needed? Is there any pushback from the industry?
So yes, that's why we pivot from making finished fibers, yarns, and leather, synthetic leather, into making ingredients and raw materials for manufacturers and converters, because they have been, using the same method and same materials for decades and decades. Changes always are more difficult, but because our ingredients can be used in existing manufacturing infrastructure, so we don't need specific type of equipment to use our materials and coatings on them. That's why we pivot from making finished products into just selling ingredients to other established companies, manufacturers, and converters, and that way we can get into the market faster, and we don't require huge capital doing so.